There comes a moment when a narcissist realizes something they never believed could happen. You have stopped caring. You stopped chasing, stopped explaining, and stopped fighting for the relationship. That realization does not bring them peace. It often triggers pure panic. Instead of quietly accepting your decision, they become unpredictable, their emotions spiral, and before long, they reach for the most calculated tactic they have left. What makes this final move so dangerous is that it rarely looks like manipulation. On the surface, it may appear to be genuine change, heartfelt remorse, overwhelming affection, or even an unexpected crisis that seems to demand your attention. But beneath that carefully crafted appearance lies a very different purpose. Recognizing this pattern can spare you months or even years of emotional confusion and repeated heartbreak. If this message resonates with you, take a moment to support Psychology with Ramani by liking this video so more people can recognize these behaviors before getting trapped by them. I would also love to hear your experience in the comments. Have you ever watched someone's entire personality seem to change the instant they realized they were losing control? The moment a narcissist senses that their emotional grip on you is slipping away, something shifts inside them. This reaction is not driven by love, longing, or a sincere desire to repair the relationship. It is fueled by the fear of losing the control they believed they had over your emotions. For a narcissist, emotional dominance is essential. They do not simply want your attention. They rely on your emotional responses, your frustration, your guilt, your attempts to defend yourself, your endless explanations, and even your confusion all become sources of validation for them. Every emotional reaction reassures them that they still have influence over your life. But everything changes when you become emotionally unavailable. When you stop arguing, stop defending yourself, and stop allowing their behavior to dictate your peace. They experience something that feels like a deep psychological blow. Their sense of superiority begins to crack. In their mind, you were never supposed to walk away emotionally. They assumed you would always remain attached in some form, whether through hope, fear, obligation, or guilt. They expected that no matter what happened, they could always draw you back into the cycle. When that emotional connection finally breaks, they are left confronting something they fear more than almost anything else. They fear becoming irrelevant. To a narcissist, losing relevance means losing significance. It threatens the identity they have carefully built around being the center of someone else's emotional world. Your indifference communicates something they struggle to accept. It shows that their manipulation no longer works. Their games no longer affect you. Their attempts to control your emotions have lost their power. That is why their behavior often becomes so inconsistent. One day, they may lash out in anger, and the next day, they may seem desperate for reconciliation. They may disappear without warning, only to suddenly return with apologies, affection, or dramatic promises of change. At other times, they may seek revenge or attempt to provoke jealousy. Although these behaviors appear different, they are all driven by the exact same objective. They want to make you feel something again. It does not matter whether the emotion is love, anger, guilt, sadness, or hope. As long as you are emotionally invested, they still have a connection to manipulate. What truly threatens them is not hatred, it is indifference. Emotional detachment is the one thing they cannot easily control. They can exploit your empathy. They can manipulate your guilt. They can take advantage of your compassion and your desire to understand. But they struggle against someone who remains calm, emotionally grounded, and no longer feels compelled to react. The moment you stop engaging, their familiar strategies begin to lose effectiveness. When you no longer feel the need to justify yourself, defend every accusation, or search endlessly for closure, the story they have been controlling begins to fall apart. Your silence becomes far more powerful than any argument ever could. The instant they recognize that their influence is fading is often the exact moment panic begins to set in. This is also why their final tactic can be so incredibly dangerous. It appears, just as you are beginning to heal, you are finally seeing the relationship with greater clarity. You are recognizing unhealthy patterns, rebuilding your confidence, strengthening your boundaries, and reconnecting with your own emotional stability. A narcissist often senses this change surprisingly well. They notice when you are no longer reacting impulsively. They recognize when logic begins replacing emotional chaos. They can feel the difference when your peace is no longer dependent on them. That is when they introduce one final attempt to regain control. It is not dramatic or obvious. In fact, It is usually subtle enough to seem completely genuine. It is carefully designed around everything they have learned about you throughout the relationship. They know which words once softened your boundaries. They know the fears you have shared, the hopes you have held on to, and the emotional wounds you have revealed. They understand what once made you question yourself and what used to pull you back after every painful experience. So, they use that knowledge with precision. Perhaps they suddenly offer the apology you have waited years to hear. Maybe they reveal an unexpected vulnerability that awakens your compassion. They might create an emergency that makes you feel responsible for helping them, or they may withdraw completely, leaving you questioning whether you have misunderstood everything. These strategies succeed because they are built around your strongest qualities. They rely on your empathy, your loyalty, your kindness, and your genuine desire to resolve conflict. The important thing to understand is that narcissists do not suddenly transform when they realize you are leaving. More often, they simply change their presentation. The manipulation remains the same, but it is wrapped in words and behaviors that appear softer, more sincere, and more convincing. Their true objective is not healing the relationship. It is disrupting your healing. They want to interrupt the progress you fought so hard to make, plant seeds of doubt, weaken your confidence, and pull you back into the emotional uncertainty where they have always held the advantage. And that is exactly what makes their final move so effective. It does not resemble manipulation at all. Instead, it looks remarkably similar to the person you spent so long hoping they would finally become. What makes this final tactic so convincing is that it gives you a brief glimpse of the person you always believed they could become. For a moment, it appears as though they finally understood the pain they caused. It seems like growth. It seems like accountability. It seems like the breakthrough you spent so long hoping for, but beneath that appearance is something entirely different. This is not genuine transformation. It is not emotional healing. It is a carefully crafted attempt to draw you back into a relationship where they once held all the emotional leverage. The goal is not to rebuild trust. It is to restore control. The timing is never accidental. These behaviors almost always appear when you have stopped reacting, stopped chasing, and started reclaiming your emotional independence. The instant they sense you are no longer emotionally available, they begin searching for any opening that might reconnect you to the cycle. That is why so many people fail to recognize what is happening. Once you emotionally detach, the balance of the relationship changes completely. For perhaps the first time, the narcissist is no longer controlling the emotional atmosphere. They are not directing every conversation, influencing every decision, or determining how you feel from one day to the next. Your calm becomes deeply unsettling to them. Your silence speaks louder than arguments ever did. Your lack of urgency tells them they no longer have the same influence over your emotions. And because they can no longer predict your reactions with confidence, they begin relying on increasingly calculated strategies designed to pull you back into emotional engagement. One of the first roles they often adopt is that of the victim. Suddenly, they are overwhelmed, abandoned, misunderstood, or facing one hardship after another. They may send emotional messages describing how much they are suffering, how difficult life has become, or how painful their past has always been. Every word is carefully aimed at awakening your compassion and encouraging you to feel responsible for their emotional state. If sympathy does not reopen the door, they quickly shift into another version of themselves. Now they become the person who has supposedly changed. They speak about self-improvement, therapy, personal growth, or finally understanding everything you tried to tell them. They begin saying exactly the things you have wanted to hear for months or even years. Their words sound almost perfect, but notice the timing. These dramatic realizations appear only after you have begun walking away. The transformation conveniently arrives at the exact moment they are losing access to you, making it difficult to separate sincerity from strategy. And if kindness, vulnerability, and promises still fail to pull you back, another mask appears. This time, they become defensive, hostile, or openly confrontational. They accuse you of being heartless. They insist you have become selfish, uncaring, or cruel. They rewrite the history of the relationship, shift blame onto you, or manufacture conflict simply to force you into another conversation. The specific emotion does not matter to them, whether it is guilt, anger, fear, frustration, or sadness. Every emotional reaction creates another opportunity for them to regain influence over you. That is why this tactic can feel so completely overwhelming. The constant shifts leave you wondering which version of them is genuine. One day, they are apologetic, and the next day, they are attacking you. Then, they are vulnerable again, only to become distant and cold shortly afterward. That unpredictability keeps your mind searching for answers. Meanwhile, they are rarely acting from confusion themselves. They are observing you. They are paying close attention to which emotional approach still affects you. They are testing every button they have learned throughout the relationship, hoping one of them still produces the exact response they want. What you are witnessing is not evidence of lasting change or authentic love. It is control desperately fighting to survive. When you stop caring, the narcissist experiences something that feels deeply threatening to their entire identity. Your emotional independence wounds them far more than arguments or emotional confrontations ever could. As long as you remained emotionally invested, even through conflict, you continued providing them with attention, validation, and reassurance that they still mattered to you. Every explanation, every apology, and every attempt to fix the relationship reinforced their sense of self-importance. Once those reactions disappear, so does a major source of the validation they have depended upon for so long. That is when their behavior often becomes even more dramatic. Their personality seems to change completely, from one moment to the next. At times, they are unexpectedly gentle and patient. Hours later, they become cold, dismissive, or openly cruel. Then they suddenly appear broken, remorseful, or emotionally overwhelmed, as though they have experienced a profound awakening overnight. These dramatic shifts are not random emotional outbursts. They are calculated attempts to discover which version of themselves still has the power to reach you. A narcissist constantly watches for feedback from you. Every single response you give becomes information for them. They are trying to identify which mask still opens the door. They may cry and insist they cannot live without you. They may finally accept responsibility for their behavior. They may share painful childhood experiences or unresolved trauma, hoping your empathy overrides your boundaries once again. If compassion fails to work, they often intensify their efforts. They may become harsh, accusatory, emotionally distant, or intentionally shocking. Their primary objective is to disrupt your emotional stability, because uncertainty weakens confidence. And a confused person is far easier to influence than someone who feels grounded and certain. These emotional swings are powerful because they reach the deepest parts of your heart. They target your compassion, your hope, your loyalty, and your belief that people can genuinely change over time. Before long, you may find yourself questioning everything you know. You begin wondering if this time, they are finally being truthful with you. Maybe they have genuinely changed. Maybe you are walking away just as they are, becoming the person you have always hoped they could be. That uncertainty is not happening by chance. It is exactly what they intended. The constant shifts between affection and hostility are not random emotional outbursts. They are deliberate attempts to discover which emotional response still reaches you. Every change in behavior is another experiment designed to test your boundaries. Because what they truly want is not mutual understanding. They want access. They are not searching for a healthy relationship. They are trying to regain control. Emotional inconsistency becomes one of their most effective weapons. The confusion it creates makes you question your instincts, doubt your memories, and reconsider decisions that once felt completely clear and final. And the moment confusion enters, the door to your life begins to reopen. Once you recognize this cycle, however, everything starts looking very different. Their dramatic personality changes are not proof of overwhelming love or emotional growth. They are evidence of pure panic. When a narcissist realizes you are slipping beyond their emotional reach, their manipulation does not become gentler. It becomes more refined and far more intentional. Their priority is not rebuilding the relationship. Their priority is reclaiming influence over your life. They want to return you to the familiar cycle, where they control the emotional climate, where your mood depends on their approval, and where your energy remains focused on managing their reactions instead of protecting your own peace. What frightens them most is not your absence. It is the loss of authority they once held over your thoughts, your emotions, and your decisions. At this point, their behavior often becomes remarkably strategic. They begin recreating situations that once made you feel emotionally connected to them. They bring up cherished memories, private conversations, meaningful places, or inside jokes that remind you of happier moments together. They understand the strong emotional pull of nostalgia, so they use it intentionally. If those memories fail to soften your resolve, they often turn toward guilt instead. Suddenly, you are reminded of everything they supposedly sacrificed for you. They emphasize moments when they supported you, stood beside you, or claimed to have loved you unconditionally. Those stories may be exaggerated, selectively remembered, or entirely rewritten, but the objective remains the same. They want you questioning your boundaries. Guilt is one of the strongest emotional anchors they can use, because compassionate people naturally struggle with the idea of hurting someone else, even someone who has repeatedly hurt them. If guilt still does not reopen the connection, another strategy often appears. Fear. Sometimes it is direct, and other times it is subtle enough that you barely notice it happening. They hint that they are falling apart without you. They suggest you are the only person who truly understands them. They imply that something terrible might happen if you continue walking away. The message is always similar. You are responsible for keeping them emotionally stable. Ironically, this expectation often comes from someone who rarely accepted responsibility for the emotional pain they caused you. What makes these tactics especially dangerous is how carefully they are disguised. They rarely present themselves as manipulation. Instead, they arrive looking like genuine vulnerability. They resemble honesty. They appear as emotional emergencies demanding your immediate attention. They create situations that make you feel needed once again. And for someone who has spent years loving deeply, forgiving repeatedly, or trying to rescue others, that feeling can be incredibly difficult to resist. But beneath the surface, the objective remains completely unchanged. They are trying to interrupt your healing before it becomes permanent. They notice the confidence returning to your life. They recognize the clarity replacing confusion. They can sense your boundaries becoming stronger and your self-worth growing healthier. And they understand something else very clearly. If they cannot disrupt that progress right now, they may never regain the influence they once enjoyed over you. That is why the manipulation often becomes far more intense during this stage. It is not because their love has suddenly deepened, but because their fear has. The emotional chaos they create is not accidental. It is one final effort to prevent you from leaving with your confidence, your peace, and your emotional freedom intact.